Remember when American cars were supposed to be practical family haulers with cup holders and cruise control? Most people think the muscle car era died in the 1970s when insurance rates and emissions killed the fun. But if you thought American performance was gone forever, you're dead wrong. In the next few minutes, you'll discover 20 weird facts about the 1992 Dodge Viper that prove Detroit could still build something completely insane, including one fact that literally burned people who bought the car: Indy 500 pinch hitter. The Viper's public debut was supposed to be at the 1991 Indianapolis 500, but not as the star of the show. Dodge had originally planned to use their Japanese-built Stealth as the pace car. Then someone at Chrysler realized how ridiculous it would look having a rebadged Mitsubishi lead America's most famous race. With just weeks to spare, they scrambled to get a pre-production Viper ready for duty. The car wasn't even supposed to exist yet, but there it was, bright red and rumbling around the brickyard with Carroll Shelby himself behind the wheel. The crowd went absolutely wild seeing this raw American muscle machine instead of another forgettable import. It was the perfect introduction for a car that would break every rule about what a modern sports car should be. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Chrysler chose their most impractical, uncomfortable, and unfinished vehicle to represent American automotive pride, but that was exactly the point. Tiny first-year run. You'd think Chrysler would have cranked out thousands of Vipers after that Indy 500 reception, but they barely built any. Just 285 cars rolled off the line for 1992, with only 236 staying in the United States. That's fewer cars than most manufacturers build in a single day. Each one was essentially hand-assembled at the new Mack assembly plant in Detroit, with the workers taking their time to get every detail right. The limited production wasn't just about exclusivity, though that certainly helped. Chrysler was still figuring out how to build this beast efficiently, and they wanted to make sure early buyers didn't end up with lemons. Every single 1992 Viper has its own story because there were so few of them. Owners knew each other, tracked their cars' histories, and treated them like members of an exclusive club. Today, finding one of these original 285 is like striking gold in the collector car world. One color only, walk into a Dodge dealer in 1992 and ask to see the Viper color options, and you'd get a simple answer: red or nothing. Every single first-year Viper left the factory in Viper Red, a bold crimson that practically glowed in sunlight. No black, no white, no blue, just that singular shade of in-your-face red. Chrysler's reasoning was purely practical. They were building so few cars that setting up the paint booth for multiple colors would have been a waste of time and money. Plus, they figured anyone crazy enough to buy a car with no windows or door handles probably wasn't too concerned about color choices. The red became so iconic that even when Chrysler finally offered other colors, most buyers still chose it. It was the perfect color for a car designed to grab attention and refused to let go. Some dealers tried to offer custom paint jobs, but purists knew the only real 1992 Viper was a red one. No exterior door handles. Try explaining to someone today that your $60,000 sports car doesn't have door handles and they'll think you're joking. But the 1992 Viper really had no exterior handles or key cylinders whatsoever. You literally couldn't open the door from outside unless someone inside pulled the release. The official reason was weight savings, though we're talking about maybe 2 pounds total. The real reason was pure theater. Chrysler wanted the Viper's body to be as smooth and uninterrupted as possible, like a race car that just happened to be street legal. Getting in required reaching through the window if you'd remembered to leave it unzipped, or having a passenger let you in. Valet parking was an adventure in itself. More than one owner came back to find confused attendants circling their car, looking for a way in. It was completely impractical and absolutely perfect for what the Viper represented: no roll-up windows. Speaking of windows, the 1992 Viper didn't have any. Well, not real ones anyway. Instead of glass that rolled up and down like every other car since the 1930s, the Viper came with the vinyl side curtains that zipped into place. Think Jeep Wrangler meets exotic sports car. The curtains were made of thick vinyl with plastic windows that would fog up, scratch, and eventually turn yellow. Installing them required the patience of a saint and the dexterity of a surgeon. Most owners just left them in the trunk and prayed for good weather. Rain at a stoplight meant you were getting wet. Highway speeds with the curtains in place created a deafening drumming noise that made conversation impossible. But here's the thing, nobody cared. If you wanted comfort and convenience, you bought a Corvette. The Viper was for people who thought modern cars had gotten too soft, too civilized. Those vinyl curtains were a badge of honor, proof that you valued pure driving experience over basic comfort. Bare bones roof. The roof situation was just as primitive as the windows. Instead of a proper convertible top or removable hardtop, the Viper came with what Chrysler generously called a sport top. It was basically a piece of canvas stretched between the windshield frame and the sport bar behind the seats. Installing it required connecting a series of clips and tensioning straps that never quite seemed to line up right. The whole operation took about 20 minutes if you knew what you were doing, which nobody did at first. Even when properly installed, the top wasn't exactly weatherproof. Heavy. Rain would find its way through the seams, and highway speeds made the fabric flap like a flag in a hurricane. The sport bar it attached to wasn't even a real roll bar, just a styling element that offered zero protection in a rollover. Most owners used the top exactly once, decided it was more trouble than it was worth, and left it gathering dust in the garage. No modern aids. The 1992 Viper was like a time machine to the 1960s before lawyers and safety advocates got their hands on car design. No airbags, despite them being mandatory on most new cars by then. No anti-lock brakes, even though ABS had been around for years. No traction control to save you when that massive V10 decided to break the rear tires loose. You got a steering wheel, 3 pedals, a gear shifter, and a prayer. That was it. The lack of electronic aids wasn't an oversight or cost-cutting measure. It was a deliberate choice to create the purest driving experience possible. Chrysler figured anyone buying a 400 horsepower rear-wheel drive convertible with no windows probably knew what they were getting into. The insurance companies weren't thrilled, but that just added to the Viper's outlaw appeal. This was a car that trusted you to know what you were doing, even if you definitely didn't. Side pipes with a sting. One of the Viper's most distinctive features was also its most dangerous. Those side exit exhaust pipes running just behind the doors looked incredible and sounded even better. They also reached temperatures hot enough to cause third-degree burns. The pipes sat right at leg level, exactly where you'd brush against them getting out of the car. Chrysler put heat shields over them, but they were mostly decorative. The metal still got hot enough to melt shoe soles and burn through jeans in seconds. Passenger sideburns became so common that Viper owners started warning each other at car shows. Some dealers even made up warning stickers on their own. The problem was bad enough that Chrysler completely redesigned the exhaust for 1996, routing it out the back like a normal car. But those original side pipes became part of Viper legend. They were dangerous, impractical, and absolutely perfect for a car that didn't believe in compromise. If you thought that was impressive, wait until you see what's coming up. A car built with help from Lamborghini, an engine that weighed more than 700 pounds, and a secret about those body panels that would shock anyone who thinks they know American cars. So let's continue. Italian-assisted by 10. Here's something that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier, Chrysler asking Lamborghini for help building an engine. But that's exactly what happened with the Viper's massive V10. Chrysler owned Lamborghini at the time, and they needed expertise in aluminum casting for their new monster motor. The Italians took Chrysler's basic iron block truck engine design and helped transform it into an all-aluminum masterpiece. The collaboration was mostly about metallurgy and casting techniques, but the Italian influence went deeper than that. Lamborghini engineers suggested improvements to the valve train and helped refine the breathing to extract maximum power. The result was a thoroughly American engine with just a hint of Italian sophistication. It was like a Detroit bruiser that had spent a semester abroad in Modena. The partnership was so successful that both companies learned from each other, though neither liked to admit it publicly. 711. Pound powerhouse. The Viper's 8-liter V10 was an absolute unit in every sense of the word. At 711 pounds, it weighed more than entire motorcycles. But those 700 pounds produced 400 horsepower and 465 pound-feet of torque, numbers that were astronomical for 1992. The engine was so large it barely fit under the Viper's long hood, and servicing it required the flexibility of a yoga instructor. Simple tasks like changing spark plugs became major operations, but the weight was worth it for the experience. The V10 didn't rev like a Ferrari or scream like a Lamborghini. It thundered like distant artillery, shaking the entire car with each combustion cycle. The torque came on like a freight train, available everywhere in the rev range. You didn't need to wind it out to go fast, just mat the throttle in any gear and hold on. It was old school American power delivery at its finest, just with more cylinders than anyone expected. Composite skin. Steel bones. While the Viper looked like it could have been stamped out of steel in Detroit, the body was actually high-tech composite. Every exterior panel was made using resin transfer molding, a process more commonly found in aerospace than automotive. The fiberglass panels were incredibly light and could be shaped into complex curves, impossible with traditional metal stamping. But underneath that space-age skin was a decidedly old-fashioned tubular steel frame. It was like building a race car, with the steel providing structure and the composite panels just along for the ride. This construction method meant body damage that would total a normal car could be fixed relatively easily on a Viper. Cracked a fender? Could just unbolt it and bolt on a new one. The downside was that the panels could crack from stress or vibration, and the doors never quite lined up perfectly. But perfection wasn't the point. The Viper was about raw performance, and this construction method delivered exactly that. Massive factory rubber. The Viper's tires were cartoonishly huge for 1992. Up front, you got 275/40 ZR 17 Michelin X GTZs. Out back, the rubber ballooned to 335/35 ZR17s. To put that in perspective, the rear tires were wider than what most exotic cars were running at the time. Those massive contact patches were absolutely necessary to handle the V10's torque. Even with all that rubber, the Viper could light up the rears at will. The tires were so wide that finding replacements became an adventure. Not every tire shop stocked that size, and the ones that did charged accordingly. The massive rubber also contributed to the Viper's brutal ride quality. There was no sidewall flex to absorb bumps, just direct transmission of every road imperfection straight to your spine. But when you needed to put 400 horsepower to the ground, those fat tires were your best friends. Have you ever seen one of these original side-pipe Vipers in person? Let me know in the comments what you remember most about that encounter. Hand-assembled. In Detroit. Every 1992. Viper was built at the new Mack assembly plant on Detroit's east side, in a special area sectioned off from regular production. This wasn't your typical automotive assembly line with robots and conveyor belts. Instead, small teams of workers hand-assembled each car like they were building race cars. The process was incredibly labor-intensive. Workers had to carefully fit those composite body panels to the steel frame, align everything by eye, and make sure the minimal weather sealing actually sealed. The engines were installed using special fixtures because they were too heavy for normal assembly line equipment. Quality control was a constant battle. Panel gaps varied from car to car, and some early cars had issues with water leaks or squeaks. But each car had character, subtle differences that made it unique. Workers would often leave their signatures hidden inside panels or under the hood, knowing they were building something special. It was old-school craftsmanship in an era of increasing automation. Long-legged. Gearing for a car, with a monster V10 and more torque than sense, the Viper got surprisingly decent fuel economy. The EPA rated it at 12 city and 20 highway, numbers that wouldn't embarrass a family sedan. The secret was incredibly tall gearing in the 6-speed manual transmission. Sixth gear was so tall you could cruise at 70 miles per hour with the engine barely above idle. The V10 had so much torque that it would pull from ridiculously low revs without complaint. You could leave it in 6th gear from 40 to 140 miles per hour if you were patient enough. This long gearing had some interesting side effects. The Viper could theoretically hit 60 miles per hour in 1st gear, though you'd be bouncing off the rev limiter. It also meant the car was deceptively quick at highway speeds. No downshifting needed for passing, just floor it and let the torque do its thing. Sticker shock. 1992. Style $52,000 might not sound like much for a sports car today, but in 1992, it was serious money. You could buy a nice house in most of America for that price. It was more than twice the cost of a Corvette and approaching Porsche 911 turbo territory. But the Viper offered something those cars didn't: pure, unfiltered insanity. For that 52 grand, you got a car with no windows, no door handles, no safety equipment, and an interior that made a work truck look luxurious. Buyers weren't paying for features or comfort. They were paying for the experience, for the ability to own something that simply shouldn't exist in modern America. Dealers often marked them up even higher, knowing that anyone who wanted a Viper would pay almost anything to get one. Some early cars sold for $70,000 or more to impatient buyers who couldn't wait for their allocation. VN Geek Trivia. Every 1992, Viper carried a VN starting with NV, followed by numbers from 100,001 to 100,285. That's it. Just 285 sequential numbers for the entire production run. Collectors obsess over these numbers like they're lottery tickets. Low numbers are especially prized, with single-digit cars commanding huge premiums. The very first production car, NV 100,001, is basically priceless. But even the high numbers have their own appeal. Owning number 285 means you have the very last 1992 build, the end of the beginning. Some owners have spent years tracking down specific numbers that have meaning to them, like birthdays or anniversaries. The small production run means every car's history can be traced, every owner documented. It's created a community where people know not just their car's number, but the stories of the cars numbered before and after theirs. Chrysler badges abroad. While Americans knew it as the Dodge Viper, Europeans got something slightly different. Export models wore Chrysler badges because Dodge didn't have a presence in most European markets. It was the same car with the same outrageous personality, just wearing a different family crest. The badge swap created some interesting situations. European auto journalists had to explain what Chrysler was thinking, building a car with no weather protection for markets where it rained constantly. The side pipes that burned Americans were even more dangerous in countries where people weren't used to them, but Europeans loved it anyway. Here was an American car that didn't try to be sophisticated or refined. It was pure, honest brutality in a world of increasingly complex sports cars. The Chrysler badge might have been unfamiliar, but the statement the car made was universal. Some people just want to go fast and don't care about anything else. Old school hardware. In an era when paddle shifters and dual-clutch transmissions were starting to appear in high-end sports cars, the Viper stuck with a good old-fashioned manual. The Borg-Warner T56 6-speed was tough as nails, but about as refined as a sledgehammer. The clutch was heavy enough to give you a leg workout, and the shifter required deliberate, forceful movements. This wasn't a transmission you could flick through with your fingertips. You grabbed that shift knob like you meant it and shoved it into gear with authority. The mechanical feel was part of the charm. You could feel every gear engage, hear the synchros working, sense the power flowing through the drivetrain. It was involving in a way that modern transmissions just aren't. Miss a shift and the transmission let you know with a grinding protest. Get it right, and you felt like a hero. There was no automatic option, and nobody asked for one. Big numbers, little help car, and driver's test numbers for the 1992 Viper were mind-blowing. 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds. Top speed of 163 miles per hour. Quarter mile in 12.9 seconds. These were supercar numbers from a car built in Detroit. But here's the kicker. You achieve those numbers with absolutely no electronic help. No launch control to manage wheel spin off the line. No stability management to keep the back end in check. No ABS to help you stop from those incredible speeds. It was just you, 400 horses, and whatever skills you brought to the table. Most owners never saw those magazine numbers because launching the Viper required perfect technique. Too much throttle and you'd smoke the tires. Too little and you'd bog the engine. Get it just right, and you'd experience acceleration that could alter your worldview. The lack of electronic aids meant every fast run was a genuine achievement. Cassette, yes. AC, no. The standard equipment list for the 1992 Viper was hilariously short. You got leather bucket seats, an AM/FM cassette stereo, and that was about it. Air conditioning wasn't even available as an option. In a car with no windows, Chrysler figured AC was pointless anyway. The logic was sort of sound. Why cool air that would immediately escape through the open sides? But it ignored the fact that even with no windows, the Viper's cabin could become an oven in summer. The engine heat radiated through the firewall, the transmission tunnel got burning hot, and those leather seats became instruments of torture. The cassette player was almost a joke. At highway speeds with no windows, you couldn't hear it anyway. Most owners just listened to the V10 Symphony and called it good. But the lack of features was part of the appeal. This wasn't a car for comfort seekers, it was for people who thought modern cars had lost their soul in the pursuit of convenience. And the surprise fact I promised you at the beginning? Those original composite body panels that made the Viper so light and shapely had an unexpected benefit. When the car inevitably got too hot inside from the lack of air conditioning and those burning side pipes, the panels would actually expand slightly, creating tiny gaps that helped ventilate the cabin. It wasn't designed that way on purpose, but Viper owners swear it's true. Just another weird quirk of a car that broke every rule and didn't care what anyone thought. That's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button so you don't miss the next one. See you there.